It's all covered in today's China Truths.
The first days of July 2025 were officially declared the start of China's main flood season. But for millions across the nation, the nightmare had already begun long before. From the factories of the north to the fertile farmlands of the south, an unstoppable catastrophe was already tearing the country apart. By July 6th, even the CCP's own Ministry of Water Resources could no longer hide the truth. 336 rivers had surged beyond their warning levels. But this was no ordinary disaster. At the heart of the crisis stood the colossal Three Gorges Dam, now at the center of internal CCP briefings warning of a potential nationwide systemic collapse. The chain of destruction was merciless. On June 29th, a catastrophic storm battered the Sichuan Basin. By 10 p.m., the Zipingpu Reservoir northwest of Chengdu began a massive water release, a move that worsened flooding in the provincial capital just days later. In Guizhou's Rongjiang County, two deadly flood waves struck within days, June 24th and June 28th, leaving residents with nothing but devastation. The second surge was so violent that emergency teams had to evacuate immediately, calling it the worst flood in 3 decades. Overnight between June 30th and July 1st, Xiangyang and Hubei was nearly wiped off the map by a sudden, raging flood. The speed was beyond belief. In Henan's Hongying Township, eyewitnesses watched in horror as a road was swallowed by water in less than 3 minutes. This destruction had been building for weeks. As early as June 8th, floodwaters swallowed towns like Dongkou in Hunan province. By July 12th, Hangzhou's famous West Lake was lashed by torrential rain, while Ximen County recorded its heaviest rainfall in 64 years. Days later, in the dead of night on July 15th, Chengdu village in Yunnan was slammed by another violent downpour. But the skies weren't the only enemy. Behind the scenes, a far more chilling decision was in motion. On June 27th, state-run Xinhua News admitted in cold, bureaucratic language that floodwaters would be deliberately diverted to low-lying areas to protect key zones. In other words, some communities would be sacrificed. And we were the ones who paid the price, a resident of Rongjiang told the reporter. The flooding here got much worse because the upstream hydropower stations kept opening their gates. In Tuoku town, people saw it with their own eyes. On June 23rd, the Tuoku hydropower station suddenly opened all 7 gates and the Yuan River came roaring down without any warning. That same day, videos on social media showed the huge man-made flood rushing through. Everything was building toward one terrifying focal point, the Yangtze River. At 6 p.m. and on June 30th, enormous flood peaks from the Min and Jinsha rivers smashed into Yibin, Sichuan, hurling a wall of water downstream toward the Three Gorges Dam. The pressure was rising like a ticking bomb. By 2 p.m. and on July 2nd, official monitoring data painted a grim picture. The reservoir had hit 152.87 meters, 7 meters above the official danger line. The dam was swallowing 30,000 cubic meters of water every second, but letting out only 20,400. It was filling at a frightening pace. By July 7th, the crisis was at its breaking point. Water had blown past the 171-meter warning threshold, inching toward the dam's ultimate limit of 175 meters, the red line no one dared to cross. Then came the bombshell. Caixin News dropped a report at 6:37 p.m., revealing what was happening inside Zhongnanhai. The top leadership was in panic mode, holding one emergency meeting after another. The orders were blunt: stop the dam from breaking at any cost. They had good reason to fear. A failure here would kill hundreds of millions downstream and shut down the nation's energy, transport, and communication networks in one stroke. An insider summed it up with chilling clarity: we have no room left to maneuver. Beijing fired off the highest level red alert. Armed police, water authorities, and the military-industrial system locked into 24/7 coordination. More alarming still, wartime contingency plans were activated. The Southern Theater Command stood ready, while engineering units quietly massed near the dam. At maximum operational status, the dam's gates were forced open, dumping vast torrents of water to keep the structure from bursting. But this was no rescue. It was a death sentence for those downstream. It's like drinking poison to quench thirst, a hydraulic expert admitted. Cities like Yichang, Wuhan, and Nanjing all declared top-tier flood emergencies as walls of released water surged toward them. And still, a darker fear loomed, the dreaded black swan event. A major quake or landslide in the volatile terrain could trigger a chain reaction no one could stop. Internal reports whispered that the dam had already suffered slight displacement after repeated flood impacts. Yet while millions lost homes, livelihoods, and lives, Beijing's silence was deafening. On July 4th, Vice Minister of Water Resources Chen Ming admitted that 329 rivers were in flood. But where was the leadership? State records show Vice Premier Zhang Guoqing, the man in charge of disaster relief, was in Hohhot on July 1st and 2nd, talking about economic growth instead of the drowning cities. It's the new reality under Xi Jinping. Gone are the days of leaders rushing to disaster zones to put on a show of sympathy. In May 2025, Xi visited drought-hit Henan, but not a word for the desperate farmers. Now, as power struggles consume the CCP, even the pretense of care is gone. Ordinary citizens are left to face the flood alone. The clearest example of this cold abandonment unfolded in Shangfang County, Yichang City, Hubei. Disaster struck in the dead of night between June 30th and the dawn of July 1st, the CCP's own anniversary. But no warning came. Sirens stayed silent. At exactly 6 a.m., a red alert for heavy rain finally appeared, but by then the streets were already rivers. In just 12 hours, from 8 to 12 p.m. on June 30th to 8 to a.m. the next morning, the skies unleashed 342.2 millimeters of rain, obliterating the county's historical record. One peak hour alone dumped 79.5 millimeters. Meanwhile, neighboring Xi'an County saw less than 15 millimeters, a rainfall gap so extreme it raised questions about whether this was purely natural. Mr. Hong, speaking from Shangfang's South Gate at 4:30 p.m. on July 1st, recalled how the storm began with sudden violence. The river filled to the brim and spilled into shops, he said. Cars were swept away. Roads are coated in thick yellow mud. Residents filmed hellish scenes, shops drowned, homes gutted, streets unrecognizable. Aunt Lee, who had spent decades building her medicinal herb business, stood powerless as murky water destroyed everything. Miss Chen, a young woman, could only watch in disbelief as her brand new car was carried off into the flood's black current. Local media reported that a married couple in Shangfang died early that morning, likely electrocuted by live power lines hidden in the water. Yet the CCP's first action wasn't rescue, it was spin. Officials claimed 18,000 people had been evacuated and that there were no casualties. Residents told a different story. Mr. Huang confirmed that the couple from the Romantic Manor Hotel had been killed and several others injured. But in China's tightly sealed information cage, the real death toll is locked away as a state secret. For years, the Three Gorges Dam stood as the Communist Party's grand trophy, proof they claimed of their power to tame nature. Completed in 2003, it was once hailed as able to withstand a once-in-a-millennium flood. Then the rhetoric quietly softened to once in a century. And now, under its own highest-level red alert, even that illusion is crumbling. On July 16, 2024, the dam revealed its true role. 11 massive floodgates opened, blasting 44,000 cubic meters of water per second downstream. In just 5 minutes, it had released the equivalent of Hangzhou's West Lake. Over the course of a single day, nearly 3 West Lakes worth of water surged into the Yangtze, drowning cities along its path. This was not flood prevention. It was deliberate flood creation, a calculated choice to sacrifice downstream lives to protect upstream stability. Wang Weilo, a hydrologist who once worked on the dam's planning, has long called it a grand deception. He insists its real purpose has always been profit from hydropower, not flood safety. The original engineering plan required the reservoir to be lowered to 145 meters during flood season to make space for incoming surges. Wang says that rule is routinely broken to keep water levels high, maximizing power output, but removing the dam's ability to buffer extreme rainfall. When the reservoir is already full, only one option remains: emergency discharge. That means sending death downstream to avoid a catastrophic breach upstream. Dr. Wang calls this a gray rhino. a huge, obvious danger everyone sees but chooses to ignore. And the rot runs deeper than one dam. China has around 98,000 reservoirs, many aging and unsafe. Secretive, middle-of-the-night water releases are routine, a way to avoid public scrutiny when floods strike. But the physical state of the Three Gorges Dam itself is now under quiet suspicion, with repeated floods leaving behind subtle but troubling signs of structural displacement. Beijing has quietly admitted it. The Three Gorges Dam is showing signs of displacement. Experts warn of cracks, crushing water pressure, and a far greater danger. The weight of its 39 billion cubic meters of water could trigger earthquakes. Since the reservoir filled, seismic activity in the area has skyrocketed, in some zones up to 30 times higher than before. NASA confirms the mass of water has even slowed Earth's rotation. The human cost was staggering. Over 1.3 million people were forced from their homes. 13 cities and 300 villages vanished beneath the waves, and priceless heritage sites were lost forever. Promises of prosperity never reached the displaced. Instead, profits flowed to coastal megacities, while the dam's navigation upgrade became a bottleneck, notorious for days-long shipping delays. Dr. Wang Weiluo exposes the fatal flaw. Dam and reservoir rights were privatized. In flood season, economic gain often outweighs safety, with reservoirs kept dangerously full for profit. China's history of catastrophic dam failures, like Banqiao in 1975, killing 240,000, shows the deadly cost of such priorities. On July 17th at exactly 8:33 in the morning, a terrifying disaster shook Hubei province. In Yichang City, near the world-famous Three Gorges Reservoir, half of a mountain suddenly gave way. In seconds, millions of tons of rock and soil roared down the slope, sliding for more than a kilometer and smashing through a winding road along the Yangtze River. Witnesses described it as if the earth itself had exploded. Clouds of dust rose into the sky, trees were ripped out of the ground, and the once peaceful mountainside turned into a sea of debris. By pure luck, the area directly struck by the collapse had no residents. 4 farmers working nearby fields dropped their tools and ran for their lives, barely escaping the destruction. No deaths were reported, but the damage was still immense. A citrus orchard was buried, village roads were destroyed, and farmland was cut off completely. Local residents say they had long feared such a disaster. Continuous heavy rainfall, combined with the constant rise and fall of the Three Gorges Reservoir, had soaked the mountainside like a sponge. The soil loosened day by day until finally the slope gave up its battle with gravity. But this landslide is not an isolated tragedy. Ever since the completion of the massive Three Gorges Dam, geological disasters have repeatedly struck the 600-kilometer reservoir area. Experts have warned for years, when water levels fluctuate between 145 and 175 meters, entire slopes are submerged and then exposed again, over and over. This endless cycle deepens fissures in the rock, weakens the soil, and transforms once stable mountains into ticking time bombs. And now, torrential rains are battering much of China, from Sichuan and Chongqing in the upper reaches of the Yangtze to Shanxi, Shanxi, and Henan in the north. Rivers are overflowing, reservoirs are swelling, and the country is entering a critical flood control emergency. On July 16th, engineers at the Three Gorges Dam made a dramatic move. 11 giant spillway gates were opened simultaneously, something that has happened only twice since the dam began its operation in 2003. An astonishing 52,000 cubic meters of water surged out every second, pouring into the Yangtze River downstream. The release relieved pressure on the dam itself, but at the same time worsened the flood situation for millions living in towns and villages below. In Baoji City, Shanxi province, the nightmare became reality. Flash floods roared through the streets at midnight, sweeping away cars, overturning buses, and turning neighborhoods into raging rivers. Videos showed residents shouting in panic, "The flood is coming, run!" Bridges collapsed, railway tracks twisted, and a locomotive on patrol duty plunged into floodwaters when an old bridge gave way. By dawn, Baoji was unrecognizable. Mud buried the streets, vehicles were stranded in heaps, and entire sections of highway were destroyed. Across northern China, disaster reports poured in. The Zipingpu Reservoir passed the 160-meter warning line. Its spillways were nearly fully opened to prevent the dam from being overwhelmed. National highways and expressways were cut off by mudslides and landslides, while more than 70 trains were suspended. Thousands were evacuated in the middle of the night. Experts now warn of an even more alarming possibility: the safety of the Three Gorges Dam itself. For years, Chinese authorities have insisted that the dam is secure, but satellite images and leaked reports have fueled speculation of structural cracks and deformation under the enormous pressure of rising floodwaters. Critics argue that the dam was built not only on a geological fault line, but also in a region prone to earthquakes and unstable slopes, making it vulnerable to catastrophic failure. If the dam were ever to break, the consequences would be unimaginable. The flood surge could sweep down the Yangtze River, submerging major cities like Wuhan within hours and threatening tens of millions of lives. Even a partial breach would unleash devastation on a scale the world has never seen. What makes the situation worse is China's long-standing approach to water management. For decades, the government has followed a philosophy of conquering nature, constructing more dams than any other country on Earth. According to the International Commission on Large Dams, a structure is considered large if it exceeds 15 meters in height or holds more than 3 million cubic meters of water. China has over 22,000 such dams, nearly half of the world's total. More than 130 of them stand taller than 100 meters. At first, these projects were celebrated as symbols of modernization, but today they are increasingly viewed as a double-edged sword. The very reservoirs meant to protect against floods are now amplifying them. Each time heavy rains fall, dams are forced to release enormous volumes of water to avoid being overwhelmed. Downstream, ordinary people pay the price, watching helplessly as their homes, farmland, and livelihoods disappear under the surge. The July 17th landslide in Hubei was a warning. It showed how fragile the balance has become between man-made engineering and the power of nature. The collapse of half a mountain may not have claimed lives this time, but it revealed the dangerous cracks in a system already stretched to the breaking point. With floodwaters continuing to rise and the dam under increasing pressure, many are asking a frightening question: how much longer can the Three Gorges hold? The hidden danger of the Three Gorges Dam, a water bomb hanging over hundreds of millions of people. When talking about the greatest engineering projects in the world, China's Three Gorges Dam is always on the list. Stretching over 2.3 kilometers long and rising more than 180 meters high, it is the largest hydroelectric dam on the planet. For Beijing, it is not just a massive engineering feat, it is a symbol of national pride. But behind this towering wall of concrete lies a terrifying risk, one that could unleash a disaster beyond imagination. In recent years, global attention has increasingly turned toward one question: is the Three Gorges Dam truly safe? Satellite images and reports have suggested small cracks and structural deformations appearing on the dam. Chinese authorities, of course, deny any real danger, insisting these are within safe limits. Yet the question remains: when a structure is holding back more than 39 billion cubic meters of water, can even the smallest cracks really be dismissed as harmless? Geologists warn that the place sits in a seismically active region, prone to earthquakes. A single strong tremor could be the final trigger, unleashing a chain reaction no one dares to imagine. If the dam were to collapse, a wall of water tens of meters high would thunder downstream along the Yangtze River. Within hours, hundreds of cities and towns would be swallowed. Yichang, up to Wuhan, even as far as Shanghai. Experts estimate up to 400 million people could be directly endangered by catastrophic flooding. Picture this: a quiet night suddenly shattered as an ocean of water engulfs entire megacities. Wuhan, with its population of over 10 million, would have little to no time to evacuate. Factories, hospitals, schools, entire infrastructures, gone in hours. The economic loss would reach trillions of dollars, but the real tragedy would be the sheer number of lives at stake. Earthquakes are not the only danger. Over the years, China has been forced to frequently release water from the dam to cope with heavy rainfall. Each release floods downstream regions, displacing millions, destroying crops and drowning villages. For many, the dam is not a shield but a sword hanging overhead. On Chinese social media, netizens have called the Three Gorges not a protector, but a giant water bomb, waiting to detonate at any time. International researchers raise further concerns. By blocking the Yangtze, the dam has disrupted the river's natural ecosystem. Millions of tons of silt are trapped, degrading the fertility of downstream farmland. Aquatic species vanish. Meanwhile, the trapped sediment puts additional pressure on the reservoir, slowly increasing the structural risk over time. One expert bluntly warned, if the Three Gorges collapses, it would be the greatest man-made disaster in modern human history. This would not only devastate China, but also shake the entire world. With China so deeply tied to the global economy, mass displacement of hundreds of millions, collapsed industries, and paralyzed transport routes would throw international markets into chaos. Even more alarming are rumors on Chinese social media about mysterious cracks and secret reinforcement work being carried out at the dam. Such posts are swiftly censored, fueling suspicion that something is being hidden. For those living downstream, the fear is very real. Many residents say they keep survival bags ready, flashlights, dry food, and life vests, living every day under the shadow of a ticking time bomb. Recent bouts of extreme rainfall across southern China only deepen their sense of dread. The biggest question now is, can the Three Gorges Dam truly withstand the next few decades? Or is it only a matter of time before nature proves that no human structure can defy the raw force of the earth? The Three Gorges Dam was once hailed as the wonder of the century, but if it ever breaks, it will go down as one of the most tragic symbols of modern history. And when that day comes, the world will witness one of the most horrifying man-made disasters of all time. The hidden danger of the Three Gorges Dam is a stark reminder that China's attempt to control nature has come at a terrible cost. By blocking the Yangtze, Beijing created not only the world's largest hydro project, but also a ticking time bomb. Cracks, floods, and geological instability now threaten to unleash devastation on hundreds of millions living downstream. With more than 20,000 dams across the country, China has multiplied these risks, destroying rivers and ecosystems in the process. What was once hailed as a triumph of engineering may ultimately be remembered as one of the nation's greatest mistakes.
Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. We will keep reporting on the COVID surge in China, so don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell to get the latest videos. And thank you for tuning in.